Welcome back to Sunday School, everyone. I'm Jared Anderson, and this is Engaging Gospel Doctrine, episode 349, which covers the Come Follow Me material for October 27th and November 3rd, A Better Covenant. This is New Testament weeks 43 and 44. I think all of us can appreciate and benefit from Hebrews 12:3, which urges that we don't grow tired in our souls and give up. So here is to all of us finishing the year strong. And here is the schedule to the end of the year. November 10th, we have Hebrews 1 through 6. November 17th, the Sunday School week is Hebrews 7 to 13. This is this episode. On November 24th, we cover James, that's home study, and December 1st, we cover 1st and 2nd Peter. December 8th, 1st, 2nd, and 3rd John and Jude. December 15th, that's a Sunday school week, Revelation 1 through 11. And then December 22nd, we have Christmas, and December 29th, we have Revelation 12 to 22. So even including this Sunday, we only have 3 Sunday school weeks. So we'll need to be mindful about how we cover the New Testament material and finish up this book of Scripture. Speaking of not giving up, I want to check in about donations as I promised you that I would. A couple check-ins with donors. This is how to do it. Mandy gave $100 and then $10 a month. That is incredibly motivating, and I'm very grateful. Crystal emailed me and lamented that she isn't in a place to donate. As I said before, this is a free podcast. I don't ever want anyone to feel badly about not being able to donate. That's why my donation approach is to ask those who can comfortably support the podcast to do so at a level that it can be enjoyed free by everyone. November donations to date, $400 in the past 2 weeks, with the average donation at $14. Donations from the past 30 days are down 30% from this time last year. I prefer donations to be at about the $10, $20 range. I think that's sustainable. And ideally, we would have enough of these like $10, $20 donations to keep the podcast completely sustainable. We don't have enough of them, however, so we are on track for me to end the podcast at the end of the year. No matter what, I can promise you that I will keep this podcast active. I'll keep it up. I'll keep all the episodes available. If we have enough donations, I won't issue new episodes, but I will reissue the old episodes in a helpful way. As usual, I imagine we'll have to rely on a few large donations in December to keep the podcast going. And I think we need to be realistic about the fact that my timing in issuing these episodes has not been what I want it to be. I feel like I'm disappointing you. Your donations are not what they need to be to keep the podcast sustainable. And so our behavior on both sides is communicating that it is time to put this podcast to rest. Now, I don't necessarily want to do that. As I said, if we have enough donations, if we can raise the $3,000 or $2,600 by the end of the year, I promise you I will keep this podcast going. It is a real blessing in my life. I'm just being very realistic and transparent with you about what it will take, given everything else going on in my life, for me to continue to prioritize this podcast. Okay, enough housekeeping. Let's get into Hebrews. The central theme of Hebrews, beautiful book, wasn't it enjoyable to read? The central theme of Hebrews is we should move forward into the future with faith. We should not slide backward into old negative habits. And above all, we should cultivate a relationship with the living God. And what I recommend we focus on in the Sunday school discussion is faith, our empathetic Savior, the fact that religion is a type and shadow of reality. The purpose of religion is to point us toward reality. And in conclusion, talking about a healthy and vibrant relationship with God. So the framing of this discussion of Hebrews is I invite all of us to reflect and ask ourselves, how do we find our most excellent target for faith and spirituality and relationship to God? This might be my favorite topic. I know I say that a lot, but this question of how do we connect religion and reality? How do we cultivate a vibrant spirituality and relationship with God in a way that increases our well-being and helps us do more good and be more good? As a quick aside, I've been thinking about how important compassionate acceptance is, and this is something new in my own life. I imagine a lot of you can resonate with this idea that in my life, I've been very, guilt-driven and grief-driven, and this feeling that I can't be good enough. If only I'm good enough, God will accept me or other people will accept me. And there's some of this in Hebrews that we need to confront. But as with all scripture and all messages, there's a mixture of messages. And I want to focus on this point that the purpose of the gospel and the purpose of spirituality and religion is to lead us to what's real. And it is to help us motivate us to cultivate this vibrant relationship with God that enables us to face our lives day by day. So just as the author of Hebrews proposes that Jesus is superior to Judaism, our present and future spirituality can be superior to the past versions of our spirituality. There's a level of irony in Hebrews where the author says Jesus is superior to Judaism in every way, but he then encourages his listeners that they should anchor themselves in what is past, their former spiritual experiences. But again, toward the end of the book, as we'll discuss, the author also encourages listeners to, have this vibrant, living relationship with God. So again, that is what I will want to focus on. And so again, the takeaway of this discussion that I want you to have is that our spirituality is quick and living and vibrant as we learn and trust from the example of Jesus Christ. So let's start off by talking about faith. Hebrews 11 is a wonderful chapter where the author talks about the examples of faith. Really quick aside, I keep saying the author of Hebrews because it is widely accepted that Paul did not write the author of Hebrews. As Thomas Wayment says in his introduction, the style and Greek of Hebrews is markedly different from Paul's other letters, as to suggest that Paul certainly did not write the letter in the same way and under the same circumstances that he wrote his other letters. So at most, this was someone else writing in behalf of Paul. But I think the simplest solution is to admit that someone else wrote the author of Hebrews. Different focus, different concerns, different emphases, different Greek, different perspective on Christ, different perspective on Christianity. It's simplest to say that someone else wrote Hebrews. We'll get into that later. That said, as I usually make the point, I think Hebrews is one of the most beautiful and inspiring, and it's certainly one of the most carefully written and carefully constructed books in the New Testament. So it's a delight to feast on. Now, my takeaway from chapter 11 of Hebrews, this idea, this by faith, by faith, by faith, it's a sermon on the Jewish scriptures, where the author is reminding his listeners that it is by faith that the miracles in Jewish tradition happened. And what I took away from this chapter, and this is a distinctly Latter-day Saint perspective, is that faith is a principle of power. I love that. Where Joseph Smith said in Lectures on Faith, the first one, faith is the principle of action in all intelligent beings. But faith is not only the principle of action, but of power also in all intelligent beings, whether in heaven or on earth. My favorite description of faith is that faith is what motivates us to action. Faith is what enables us to make hope real. Does that make sense? We have hope in this idea, and we can have faith and feel peace that we are on the right direction, that we are aligned on the right path. And the author of Hebrews says, all these people did not receive what was promised. They were looking forward with an eye of faith, as we read in the book of Ether, that they saw at a distance. As best as we can tell, only humans have the power to imagine. Isn't that interesting? Some animals are able to imagine things that are real, like a cat that's sitting at the hole in the wall where she heard the mouse earlier. So there are some animals that are able to imagine things that exist. But as best as we can tell, humans are the only beings that can imagine what does not exist. And I think this is the core of faith. This is part of what makes us children of God, in addition to our ability to use our agency to love. We have the ability to make real, through effort, what we can imagine and have faith in. So again, for me, this is the biggest takeaway of the way Hebrews talks about faith, that we are able to have faith in what is not yet real. We can have faith and hope. Another important thing about the Greek word for pistis is that it means both faith and faithfulness. And I really, really love that. I feel like in our culture, we talk a lot about believing in, having faith in. But again, faith is also a principle of motivation. It's a principle of action. It's a principle of power. And that is why my favorite description of faith is that faith is what enables us and motivates us to make real, to realize, to put into action and practice the things that we hope for and believe in. So we first believe in the principles of the gospel, and then we put them into action. Then they become real. And the gospel is a gospel of transformation. And that is why the purpose of the gospel is to become like the Savior, become like our heavenly parents. And this is the process, is that we believe something, we believe in the principles of the gospel, we put them into practice, thus making them real, and then our lives bring the kingdom. They bring heaven on earth. I really love that. Another emphasis in the book of Hebrews comes from Hebrews chapter 2, where the author talks about, remember that we'll talk more about this in just a moment, but the main flow of the argument of Hebrews is that everything that Judaism typifies and symbolizes is realized through Jesus Christ in a more real and powerful way. And part of this is that Jesus, as our high priest, can be, it says, by the grace of God, he may taste death for everyone. The prince of their salvation is made perfect through sufferings. He also shared in the same experience so that through death, he would destroy the one who has the power of death, which is the devil, and deliver those who were held in slavery to a fear of death all their lives. He was obligated to be made like his brothers and sisters in every way so that he would become a merciful and faithful high priest in the things of God to make an offering for the sins of the people. He personally suffered when tempted. He is able to help those who are tempted. This is something that I have a greater testimony than I ever have had before through my practice of ministry and chaplaincy. I've referred before to this book, The Wounded Healer, and the author of The Wounded Healer, who we do know, puts it so beautifully, where the purpose of ministry is not to make better. It's not to fix people. It is to sanctify and save people, but it's not just to get over things. It's not to get over our grief. It is, as the author of Hebrews talks about Jesus, the purpose of presence and companionship and ministry is to share our pain and our grief and our humanness at a depth where it can be felt. This is the ministry of presence. And the author of Hebrews is making the point that Jesus, our high priest, has this ministry of presence. Jesus has, this is the condescension of God. The author of Hebrews is arguing and supplicating us to take seriously the fact that Jesus experienced and suffered in a way that Jesus is able to empathize and meet us in our suffering. My favorite understanding of the atonement is that Jesus lived every moment of our lives and our deaths in a way that Gethsemane and the atonement is forever present. That Jesus took on all of reality and everything short of salvation, internalized it, digested it, metabolized it, and that the gospel and the atonement is one reason why it's eternal is it is this eternal process of us becoming more and more perfect. And so it's really beautiful how the author of Hebrews argues that this is a priest made perfect in suffering. Okay, let's jump forward to Hebrews chapter 10, where the author says, the law is a type of good things to come, but it is not the reality itself. In verse 9, he abolishes the first in order to establish the second, quotes at length from Jeremiah 31:33. This is the covenant I will make with them. I will put my laws in their heart. I will write them on their minds. Okay, let's go down the rabbit hole for a bit because this is a very, very important point. Active church membership can be idolatry. That's pretty radical. We need to take seriously the fact, and I really believe that the scriptures are inviting us and pushing us to this realization that religion is both vital and not enough. Remember, the purpose of the gospel, the purpose of religion is to catalyze a personal, vibrant, transformative relationship with God. And it is so easy to forget that. It's so easy to lose sight of that. And if we get content and satisfied and complacent in church activity, reading the scriptures, fulfilling your calling, paying your tithing, going to the temple, it's not that any of these are bad, but they are not sufficient. And so I'm going to follow the flow of the argument of the author of Hebrews. And I will get into why this is problematic in a moment. Hebrews is anti-Jewish in a way that we need to confront. I'll get into that as soon as I wrap up Sunday school. Similarly, our relationship to religion can be problematic. So the main argument of the book of Hebrews is that everything Judaism does, Jesus can do better. that everything Judaism has is fulfilled more perfectly through the ministry and sacrifice of Jesus. That Judaism was pointing toward a greater reality. One of my favorite teaching moments teaching experiences, learning experiences, is where as soon as we learn something, even if we've never considered it, it's obvious. It's like, oh, of course. So I can say statements that I think every single one of you will agree with. This is something I pride myself on and that I celebrate, is that I really try to teach the scriptures and teach the gospel in such a way that it is very, very hard to disagree with. And I believe in the gospel, and I believe that there is a way to engage with the gospel that all of us can get behind. And as I said, that is my primary target with ministry, with this podcast. So here's the argument. The author of Hebrews is saying, everything that Judaism does, Jesus does better, that Judaism is pointing toward a greater reality. Similarly, everything we do as members of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, I really do lament the fact that we don't have an ism. I prefer the title LDS Christianity, take it or leave it. But everything we do in church is pointing towards something greater. As I said, it is pointing toward this vibrant relationship with God. This is a point worth repeating, even belaboring. So just as Judaism points toward a greater truth that is symbolized in Christ, Christ points toward something greater. Our church activity points towards something greater. Spirituality points towards something greater. Religion points towards something greater. And so I think, please do email me or message me if you can disagree with this. God is greater than our understanding. Can anyone disagree with that? We as limited human beings cannot comprehend or fathom God. We as limited human beings cannot fathom reality. This is one of my greatest passions, is understanding the human experience, understanding how we as limited human beings can engage with spirituality and religion. So one of my aphorisms is, to define is to betray. So as soon as we define something, we're wrong, and yet we as human beings need to engage in those specifics in order to grow. So this is why I think the healthiest target for religion is a vibrant, healthy, living relationship with God that can update. And so my prayer and my plea as we read and as we discuss Hebrews is we should ask ourselves, how is your faith today greater than it was last week, last year? How is your relationship with God more living, more vibrant than it was? Or in a more open way, where is your relationship with God? I really do believe, with apologies to the author of Hebrews, that we can't slide back. I deeply believe that we can never go back to where we were. We can get to a worse version of where we were, but we always are moving forward. I think that we can move toward God and healthiness and wellness and salvation, or we can move away from it, but we are always moving forward. So again, my prayer as we reflect on the book of Hebrews is that we will use everything that we know and everything that we've learned, including the scriptures, to cultivate this vibrant, living relationship with God. Okay, let's now get into the Sunday school portion. Sorry, my laptop is being strange. Fortunately, it's still recording. Let's get into the Sunday school and study notes portion of this episode. You're welcome to stop watching or listening if you want. Okay, this is from Raymond Brown's excellent Introduction to the New Testament. what is the book of Hebrews? It is from either the 60s or more likely the 80s. From, we don't know. Greetings are extended from those from Italy. To, based on content, it is addressed to Christians who are attracted by the values of the Jewish cult, which would place them at Jerusalem or perhaps Rome. So Hebrews may have been both from and to Rome. The author is not identified. It never claims to be by Paul, and later church attribution to Paul is now abandoned. This is how it is divided. This is the flow of the argument. Chapter 1, verses 1 to 3 is the introduction. 1, 4 to 4:13 is the superiority of Jesus as God's Son over the angels, over Moses. Chapter 4, verse 14 to chapter 7, verse 28 talks about the superiority of Jesus' priesthood. Chapter 8, verse 1 to 10:18 is the superiority of Jesus' sacrifice and his ministry in the heavenly tabernacle, inaugurating a new covenant. Chapter 10, 19 to 12:29, faith and endurance, how we can avail ourselves of Jesus' priestly work. 10, 19 to 39, exhortation to profit from the sacrifice of Jesus. 11, 1 to 40, Old Testament examples of faith. 12, 1 to 13, the example of Jesus' suffering and the Lord's discipline. 12, 14 to 29, warning against disobedience through Old Testament examples. 13, 1 to 19, injunctions about practice. 13, 12 to 25, conclusion, blessing, and greetings. So again, the context of Hebrews, we don't know whether this was addressed to members of the early Christian church who were formerly Jewish or Gentiles who were very, very drawn toward Jewish ritual. But it is clear that, you can just read it carefully and tell that the author is saying, I know that you are very attracted to Judaism. I take that seriously. It's not dismissive of Judaism. It's saying, in fact, the author of Hebrews quotes from the Jewish scriptures more than any other book. There's the longer quotes, Psalms all over the place. The author of Hebrews is saying, Judaism is wonderful. Here is how Judaism points toward Jesus as the fulfillment of Judaism. So the authorship of Hebrews, as I said, the Greek of Hebrews is very eloquent. And so this could have been, a Greek-speaking Jewish Christian. I like the idea that Apollos possibly wrote it. But again, as Origen of Alexandria said, as to who wrote Hebrews, God knows. Okay, the last thing that I want to talk about is anti-Judaism and supersessionism. One of the challenging things that we need to confront from a doctrine or theological perspective is, what is the relationship between all the religions on the planet? No surprise, I personally love those teachings, such as the First Presidency Message in 1978, God's Love for All Mankind, that God inspires all humanity. God inspires every culture. Every culture has the Spirit of Christ. And I believe that we can simultaneously believe that we are in the religion where we should be, and even that our religion has the most truth. I do think we need to confront the fact that no one religion contains all the truth. No one religion is the direct manifestation of God's will on earth. We've discussed before how the Ninth Article of Faith, the belief in continuing revelation, President Nelson has been emphasizing this very strongly, buckle up, get ready, the restoration is not over. We don't, even if everything we believed was true, which I don't believe that, we don't have it all. There is further light and knowledge. There is more and more. And the reality is greater than anything we can understand. And as a scholar of religion, I can attest that the layers of religious truth that we have are very much the results of the historical and cultural context of the moment when they were revealed. And this is why we need continuing revelation, and this is why continuing revelation is so wonderful. So what is the relationship of all religions? As I said, I believe that all religions have some truth. I believe that God reveals as much as we will receive, and I deeply believe that each person needs a direct personal relationship with God. And what some of us need, like we each need something different as well. So how does this relate to the letter to the Hebrews? We need to be honest about the fact that Hebrews in the New Testament in general reflects anti-Judaism and what's called Supersessionism. I taught about this in my world religions class. So Judaism, Christianity, Islam, and the LDS Church are all supersessionist religions. So how this works is Jews believe that they are the covenant people of God, but they also believe that Gentiles, non-Jews, have a way to be right with God, the Noachic or Noahide laws, for example. And then Christians I took a whole graduate course on the rise of anti-Judaism in early Christianity. So the premise of Christianity is that Judaism is insufficient. There are some Christians who believe that Jews, and Paul may have believed this, as we said when we covered Romans, when I covered Romans, that Paul may have believed that the Jews will be saved according to Judaism and the Gentiles will be saved according to Christianity. But in general, Christianity is the first ever exclusivist religion. Christianity is the first religion ever to say every single human who has ever lived has to be saved through Jesus. Now, Indian religions such as Hinduism and Buddhism, especially Buddhism, will say it's all an illusion, we don't know. But again, Christianity is the first religion to say, every single person needs to be saved in our way through Jesus. Now, Hebrews is a friendly, beautiful anti-Judaism. It says Judaism has value, Christianity just has more value, and anti-Judaism goes all the way through the continuum of the Gospel of John or the Epistle of Barnabas, which is not in the New Testament, fortunately, that says Judaism is a revelation from the devil. So Judaism is anti-Judaism in the New Testament in early Christian tradition goes on a continuum from Judaism is true, Christianity is more true, and that's what the author of Hebrews teaches. Paul is similar in that he teaches, Judaism, and we have this generally in Christianity, where it says, the purpose of Judaism is to point people forward to Christ. But the problem with it is the implication and the function of this is that Jews cannot be put right with God according to their own beliefs, and that's problematic. And similarly, when I taught world religions, we would discuss are Mormons at the time, but are members of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, are they Christian? And where I think the root of this is that according to Latter-day Saint belief, doctrine, ordinances, temple, Christians' current relationship with their own religion is not sufficient to put them right with God. Again, this is the purpose of temple work. This is the purpose of missionary work, is that the only way to be right with God is temple-going activity in the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. We each have a different relationship to that idea, but again, we just need to be aware of that. And as I said to my students, I hope that at a minimum, we can respectfully say, I can understand why this might be difficult for you. And again, I personally believe that God works with each of us exactly as we are, that we are all on our own spiritual journeys. And as I've shared, I feel that God has called me to meet each person where this is literally what I do as a chaplain, as an interfaith chaplain, and I'm so grateful for it, is that I get to meet each person where they are and speak in their spiritual language as best as I can, and then refer them to other resources if I go beyond what I can. And I deeply believe, I'm literally presenting on this week at the prison, and I'll conclude with this. I deeply believe that there is a way to reverence and respect our own personal relationship with God, wherever that is, and also respect each other person's spirituality and relationship with God. And I don't think that precludes missionary work. I think that there is room for missionary work, and that all of us can say, why don't you, faith, why don't you try this? See if it increases well-being, see if it draws you closer to God. We also need to be respectful and believe people when they say, for me right now, it doesn't. And again, this could be called relativism. But one of the paradoxes of human nature is the best way to catalyze change is to love and to respect each person where they are, including where each of us are. Thank you for joining me for another episode of Engaging Gospel Doctrine. I'll get this posted today. As I said, I'll do my best to get ahead. Thank you to those who are donating to the podcast for making it able to continue. And I do hope that I can continue with the Book of Mormon next year. I am in a place where I can put the podcast down if that is where we are. But again, I hope for continued support. Thank you.